Hello, everyone, to another episode of 10 or Less, the educational podcast series where we take a boring chapter from a textbook and convert it to a video 10 minutes or less so you can get the gist of what the chapter is talking about. Today we have Sustainable Cities and Environmental Science Overview. This is actually one of the longest presentations that I made, so we're just going to go jump straight into it. First person, this is a guy. We're just going to assume he is just an average person in somewhere in the world, who just kind of happens to travel along this journey of where cities really came from and why they are such a problem they are now. So, point one, people are leaving rural areas. So why are they leaving? They're being pushed away from rural areas such as farming communities or small towns due to poverty, lack of land to grow food, declining agriculture jobs, famine and war. It's not the fact that agriculture suddenly become less important. It's the fact that we've gotten so good at it that we have huge tractors that can do so much better of a job than it would be to just say hire a couple of 100 people to say harvest a field of corn. Instead, we have machines that can do all this stuff really rapidly and really efficiently. So that's one of the main reasons why agriculture jobs have been falling down. This is apparent both in developed countries and developing countries, and global trends show that more and more people are leaving rural areas and heading to urban cities. So, why cities? What's so good about them? Well, cities are places where you expect to have better healthcare, better education, a more stable job, not to mention entertainment and other various opportunities for yourself and your family. And as more urban cities are built, they continue to get a stronger pull for more people surrounding in the surrounding rural areas, with the same promises. There's better healthcare here, public schools, jobs, and so on and so forth. This is happening all over the world, and to some extent, it's still happening even in the United States. But what are the dangers of cities? First of all, urbanization and its impact on the environment. Urban centers lead to a great degradation of various natural capital. And by capital, I mean things like land, water, air, the plants and animals, the habitats that live there. Having a city smack in the middle of some place like that would eventually degrade and, in a way, damage the fragile ecosystem that you have there. And as more and more cities happen, as cities start to grow and expand, you'll start to see more problems with that. Next, land use. As cities spread, they take away land from cropland, forests, natural habitat. They may impact wildlife and cause harm to other natural resources around the city. The image you see here is just a nice little world map, and I've just kind of highlighted a couple of cities that show that if you take a look at these areas from an aerial photograph, you'll see that there really isn't a lot of green anymore. It's a lot of concrete, it's a lot of industrialization, it's a lot of flattening out the land and development happening. Lots of things take place here, and the natural ecosystem suffers for it. Next, there's also pollution. With more people living in a single location, the pollution that is created from the cities is a lot more concentrated. One of the examples is cars and their exhaust fumes. Having a couple cars in the rural region where you might have maybe 16 to 20 families within a square mile radius, or square mile, excuse me, and comparing that to, say, 10,000 people living in a city. There's a lot more pollution that 10,000 people in a city would produce as opposed to just a couple of families living out in the farming regions. Next, there's also resource use. As the population of a city increases, so does the demand for food, energy, water, and other resources. One thing that many people don't consider is space. Space is actually a resource, and as more people enter cities, you'll have to find space some way. Really developed countries like Singapore have countered that, because Singapore is actually a very tiny island. They've countered this problem by building up instead of out. And by building up, I mean they have really tall skyscrapers and condominiums where you can stuff maybe 600 people or so in a nice big complex that only takes the same size as about your average high school. So, what do we do? How do we make it better? Well, our goal is sustainable growth. So a couple of things that we can do are set boundaries for urban growth. Set aside certain areas of our land and tell people you can't develop in this land. We're protecting this region, we're protecting the environment here, and you can't grow the city here. Find another place to grow. Next, plan the growth of your city accordingly. Rather than having just a random sprawl take place, say we're going to grow in this direction to avoid a fragile ecosystem region, or we're going to grow in this direction so that we don't pollute the water or river systems too much. Next, maintain local parks and nearby regions. Basically, your parks, your natural forests, national forests, excuse me, and state parks as well. Those, make sure you protect those because those are really valuable and they do offer ecosystem services. Next, use renewable energy sources to power a city. These are things like solar, wind, geothermal. There's a whole bunch that I talk about in the renewable energy sources presentation. But the more renewable energy sources you use, the less fossil fuels you're burning, the less pollution you're creating, the less energy it needs to be transported back and forth and all that. And finally, encourage mass transport, biking or walking. Mainly because the number one mode of transportation that we have today in America is cars, motorized vehicles. If you stop using cars, if you start biking, if you start walking, taking mass transport, and only traveling if you absolutely have to, then you can cut down on the amount of fossil fuels that we're burning. If the entire city of New York decided, hey, we're not going to drive cars, we're all going to bike or we're all going to walk, and many of them do, but if you're able to convince the entire population to do that, well, that's a lot of cars that you're taking off the road and a lot of cars that aren't burning any fossil fuels. So that's pretty much the kind of goal that we want to get to. Anyways, that was sustainable cities, their impacts, why people are going into cities, and a couple of tips and hints on how to make them sustainable. Thanks for watching.